What's going on, everybody? It is your boy Zamboni, and we are back with What is the Time, a podcast about celestial timing, personal sovereignty, and living where the getting is good. Today, we have a teacher who has been a huge influence on me, someone who has been a major influence on the way that I go about thinking about what reality even am, when I think with how to be in the world and how to live with things. One of my favorite things about this teacher is that he reads a lot of Ursula Le Guin. And when I found him, then I knew that it was love at first read. It was wonderful, and I am truly excited to have the blogger and founder of Rune Soup, which is a blog and podcast about, all of the best new and old ideas for living in the world, or something like this. I forget what the catchphrase is. Yeah. But it's a lovely space where we learn all sorts of different things about how to be in the world and how to live with magic, and all of the best things. Honestly, I love this place and have learned so much growing as a member of that community. We have here. He is also an excellent and premier fortune teller. Which is a big deal for folks listening to this podcast. We are astrologers and whatnot around here. We care a lot about predictive models and how to think with time, and that is what we're here to do. So thank you very much, the one and only Crown Prince of Chaos Magic, Mr. Gordon White. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super looking forward to it. I love these kind of conversations.
Cool. Well, let's get right to it then. So you work a lot with predictive models. You work a lot with what you call a blended cycle model, which uses not only astrology, but also economic models and timing models that come out of Central America and come out of all of the different places. And so it's clearly been something that you've spent a lot of time with and a lot of time on. So why? Why at all? Why use a predictive model at all? Who cares?
It's a question I possibly can't answer, because it's a good question and it's open. Like why would you do this? And I just think it's a personality type thing, right? Like the people who are interested in having some sort of relationship to the future or futures. It's just, we're kind of like made that way, because some people, they've got a case. They've got a case of like, no, they think we should be in the moment and all the rest of it. So for me, I've just always loved and been almost near obsessed with time, and because time is just like a word we have for life, for like the ongoingness of the universe. So to have a metaphysics of time is to have a metaphysics of the universe. So it's kind of like, I actually do get people who say like, nah, nil interest in things like astrology or tarot, not because I don't think they work. I think they do. That's not stuff I want to know. I want to know as much as possible and as accurately as possible. So that's it. That's genuinely a sincere interest in the future. And even, I guess on like an ego level, winning in the sense of like risk management. I don't understand. Again, I've had a corporate career where you have to do forecasting and risk management and the rest of it. Like, this is what happens if we go, if the market's up 5% or if the market's down 1% or what have you. Like, there are different, everything spins out of these scenarios, how much you get to spend, like how many staff you get and what your bonus is and all that kind of thing. So it's just, I like it. And I like that. I like that feeling of entangling with the future. And it's just like something like astrology makes it all taste better, right? Because it gives you a framework that's alive, like the whole universe, that you can in some way, you are in some way related to Saturn, to like this being, right? That's amazing. So it's just delicious, I think is the one word answer.
Word. That's what's up. Yeah, I was going to ask you, actually, if you just stare into the abyss just for kicks.
I think we do.
Sounds like yes.
You've got to be honest about it. Like, I think we do. I think astrologers are a type, right? Forecasters are a type. Now, some of them have, so I think about some of my friends who are professional tarot readers and have had kind of you know, proper clairvoyant abilities from being a child, like being able to see dead people and so on. And I kind of had some of that, but it would go in and out. But even without that, there's just a type of person who's like, no, I'm going to be about the future. I think that's for me.
Word. Yeah, and there's like a certain fun in being right about stuff, right?
Oh yeah,
When you
totally.
when you get a good prediction and it like goes the way you said it was going to, like what a rush that is. It feels so good.
That's like after 20 years of magic, because it works, right? But even like I know that when performing enchantment, and then when it works every time, it's like the first time. It's this amazing recognition of the universe recognizing you, recognizing it. And a correct forecast is the same thing. It's like shit. Like I entangled with the future, and then it happened. That's awesome, right? Even when and that's a good comfort, especially when you're forecasting things that aren't going to go great. The comfort in that is that it is in some sense ordained, which is to say it is in some sense meaningful, because this is a good definition of the difference between pain and suffering is pain without meaning, right? So if you go through some shit and you don't have a framework for understanding it, that puts you in a very dark place. That's suffering. So one of my teachers, Alberto Villoldo, says, pain is unavoidable, suffering is optional. And that's to say that if you don't have a framework of understanding the bad in your life, it can be far more damaging.
Yeah, this is very much the way that I go about it as well. This idea of like sort of contextualizing the moment, like, and if it. One of the things that I find myself telling to clients all the time is you are right on time. If you are going through this thing, then good job, because you are in the right spot in this place. And so just having that sort of context to know that this was in some way ordained is the word that you used. That also means meaningful. And so then that sort of gives this person some kind of sense of, even if they're going through something, then it gives a sense of like, all right, but like, you know, God or something, you know, like it makes it feel big and good. So as we sort of look at improving our predictive models, you recently put out an advice to astrologers video, wherein you purportedly did not give advice to astrologers and then gave advice to astrologers for like 2.5 hours after that.
Yeah.
But in that presentation, you gave a bunch of great points, so I accept the advice because it was super helpful in a lot of ways. But one of them was wrong is fine, don't be stupid. So when you get good predictions, then it feels so good, and you just want to do it more and more and more. What kind of, like the best predictors in the world, what kind of odds do they get?
So in astrology, frankly, not that good, right? But I kind of look wider again from a blended cycle model. It's still better than chance, right? But if you look at how good, say, the Stargate program, the CIA remote viewing program got at its peak, that was about 75% accurate. Now, it's a different thing because they're actually locating specific targets, whereas as a fortune teller, you're entangling with the future, which exists and has some kind of topography or reality, but it's not as concrete as saying like, where is that downed Soviet jet? You know what I mean? Like, so part of the question brings in the accuracy, but I would say you want to be, and I think of like the astrologers that I know that are pretty good predictively, and one, they don't stick to one kind of like school or astrological framework. So they might have a home school, like it might be like I live in Hellenistic, but I holiday Vedic, whatever, right? And or even modern, and that's kind of all good, right? So the ones that are the best at it are the ones that don't mistake the framework for reality, and that's one of the keys. You kind of have to be, and those ones I think you can get about 60%. Between 60 and 70%, again, depending on the question. Some questions for tarot cards, some questions you can pretty much be 100% if you're cynical. Is he still thinking about me? And as Brent would say, is he here now? when you get the love questions, like, are we going to get back together? It's like, I don't need to turn over any cards for this, right? That's not going to happen. That's honestly part of the job, right? That kind of truthfulness. But I would say between 60 and 70% for the right kind of question. How do I find happiness is actually a good diffuse question for astrology. It's like, well, these are the things that you have natural inclinations for. So in that approximate direction. But you got to be honest with yourself, that will be a good 40% accurate answer, right? Because you're just going to drop people in and like, well, you might be interested in agronomy, or you might be interested in ancient coins or something. So you're kind of putting people in this massive ballpark, but you're not saying like you're going to be you're going to be, I can look at your stars and say you're going to be really, really interested in growing snow peas. Like that's like a knock it out of the park 100%. But you can kind of push people in that sort of like, have you considered container gardening or whatever? So for realistic questions like, am I going to get this job, or is this country about to fail, or whatever it happens to be, good astrologers, I think, get to low 60s and the game, right? And this is kind of why that video wasn't supposed to be advice to astrologers, but then by the end of it, I'm like, that kind of was. The game is to be honest about the predictive accuracy and lean into that, like, and say, okay, well, this is a framework that you can do a lot of powerful thinking with a framework that can give you a 60% accurate view of the future. It doesn't have to be the other 40%, the wrong, is just built into it. Same as the CIA and remote viewing. There's 25% of it that's just wrong. And they knew that. So when they would get their feedback from their viewers about where it could be, they're looking at the overlays of, like, if you look at what this one saw and this one and this one, you kind of look at where they all lined up and go, so we're medium confident that this is where the plane is based on this information. And you just kind of build the wrong into the model. And I don't see enough of that in astrology. And I think I do with the good ones, right? Like, and I don't think people should locate the shame around being wrong. And because it's a difficult thing for humans to experience. We are built to feel shame around being wrong at something, right? And that's unfortunate. And that happens with anything. Like if you misremember the name of an actress in a show you're watching and someone corrects you, it doesn't feel great. It doesn't mean anything, but it doesn't feel great. And so I think we need to be more self-conscious about the sources of material that come into our models. But I would like forecasters in general to be okay with being wrong, because it's part of the game. Just be right more often than wrong, but you're going to be wrong.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for asking my next question for me there. You were talking about improving source material, and that's another one of the important points that you made in that video, which was garbage in, garbage out. Will you just talk about that a little bit? And
yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's a kind of early computing science understanding of a system, a program, for instance, that it's only ever going to be as good as what you put in. And for instance, I'm terrible at Excel, but like, even if I was, the garbage that you put in from a data perspective, because that was my background, I would do data analytics and so on. And if you're not getting good, say, demographic data into your audience modeling, then the audience modeling is wrong. And we would spit out the weirdest things at Time Out, for instance, which is a kind of like music and gigs magazine, in particular in London, but now New York and whatever, all around the world. And so because we pull information just from our Facebook followers and put it into this audience model, we'd have this idea that the most popular musical artists for Time Out, which is Going Out magazine, was like Coldplay and what was the other one? Coldplay came out on top. And I'm like, this isn't good. Like, Coldplay is a best-selling artist, so we haven't got any nuanced information. This is just background internet. So we're getting our garbage data in and pushing out these audience models that were wrong, that we were then trying to like target advertising against, right? And that happens for any kind of framework or system. And astrology is a framework of frameworks. So what you put into it is how do I consider the governances of reality amongst like the planets and the houses? If you look at like House of God or something like that, right? we didn't have planes, we didn't have any of this kind of stuff when that was invented. So if you need to work out what its governances are, and that happens on an information in perspective. And I actually think, and this is kind of the point of the video I made a few months ago, I'm very taken by Tyson Yunkaporta's difference between a product of thought and a way of thinking. Now, in astrology, a product of thought is, let's say, horary. Like it's a thing that you can just do that has come from centuries of astrologers working out the relationality between the sky and the moment and a question. That working out is a way of thinking. The product of thought is horary. And it's not like you can't use horary, obviously. But what's always interested me about the difference in astrology is that, especially now that there's, obviously, because I don't know that much about it, but ever since we have like astrological programs like Astro Gold and so on, there's less and less of actual relating to the sky and more about playing it like it's a computer game, right? But the original astrologers would be looking at, like, let's go back to Babylon, they'd be looking at neighboring kingdoms' grain harvests of whether or not who the son of an enemy was going to be marrying and all the rest of it, because these are all data that have to feed into it's like, cool. So our enemy is making a powerful marital alliance with someone who's like unaligned with us. Now let's go and look at what Mars is doing for the king's chart for the next year and see if we can see war stuff happening. Because if you get it wrong for the king, you're dead. You know what I mean? And so that stuff I don't see enough of in astrology. I see some of it, but the world has been better, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And a failure to kind of do that product of thinking. It's like, right, what is the stuff that feeds into the model so that as I rearrange it with these systems and look into the future, I can actually improve my predictive capacity, right? Because the software in the middle, and I don't mean the actual software, because I think Astro Gold is still quite shit, but the software in the middle, which is like your actual forecasting capacities, like the different skills and whatever, is pretty good. And people tend to keep improving that. Like I made the joke of like, do you need better news sources or do you need another webinar on Zodiacal release? And like, there's not as much gain anymore. You got to get to a certain skill level, but there's not as much gain in just refining the little model in the middle of the garbage in, garbage out, as there is in making sure you're not getting garbage in. And that's kind of where that's where I want people to be looking in these unprecedented, well, not really unprecedented, this is an astrology show. In these incredible times, you're just going to get worse and worse and worse if your astrology just matches official reality. And astrology is, like, I keep thinking about this, Scorpio exists. Like, astrology is built for a nuanced understanding of how power works. Like, it's literally a kingly, a royal tactic for playing the Game of Thrones, right? And if we, because of, let's say, peer pressure reasons, don't look at that, it's kind of like having astrology without Scorpio. It's like you've missed one of the things that I think it's excellent at, not just good at, I think excellent at, which is this nuanced appreciation of how things like power and calamity move in your world, right? And yeah, that was my thinking behind it.
Indeed. So there's two things there. So first is like you have to improve the information that goes into your system and figure it out. And then the second thing is that you kind of have to know everything. Like you have to know all of the geopolitical stuff, and you have to know, like all the economic stuff, and you have to know, like, so this gets, what can be troublesome here is sort of deciphering signal versus noise.
Yeah.
You know, like you have to know, if you have to know everything and you have to listen to everything, which may include garbage takes, which may include falsehood and these kinds of things, then how do we navigate in the era of like what even am news or what even am information and this kind of thing, right? Like how do we go about navigating that?
With practice is a glib answer, but it's true. And this comes almost like a product of thought way of thinking distinction. You have to learn how to learn. So you actually can start with the forecast and go, right, so there's a lot of, and this comes back to like, be okay being wrong and don't hide it. What will happen is people will get a forecast wrong and then just never mention it again and hope no one else noticed. I noticed. When that's you, go, okay, I got that wrong. Why did I get that wrong? And it's literally, it's not going to be in the system. Like it's not actually going to be in the, well, that's what this transit, like, you know, you didn't get the transit wrong. Like that's actually what happened. It's the transit picked up stuff that you didn't see. Like the transit expressed itself through stuff that you didn't think was real. And so you have to learn how to learn, which is like, okay, well, fuck, that was wrong. And I didn't expect that invasion of, or the special operation, or whatever we call it, in Ukraine. What did I miss? And because everyone, this is the thing that drives me nuts. And it's actually what started the video off, because it was only about 4 or 6 weeks after the special operation, was everyone misses it. And then they go back to the space weather and go, oh, that's where it is. And all of a sudden they're experts in it. And like you've gone back to the system that did predict it. But if you go back there and all of a sudden become an expert on Ukraine because you're like, now, oh, I guess I wasn't looking at Russia's chart of blah, blah, blah. It's like, look, you missed it. And the system picked it up, you missed it. So what is the stuff that's coming into the system that will allow you to do it? And that's what I mean by learning how to learn. It's okay not to know this shit to start with, right? It's okay. And in fact, cycle models are good for this. You kind of only need to know trends to be able to do the like medium to long-term forecasting, like inflation and all the rest of it. You need to know what the trends are. And that will get you like 80% of the way there. And then when you get things wrong, you go back into the nuance. So learning how to learn is there, but there is also a skill. And I mean, I studied, communications, and I have like, a background in media and so on. So I have some experience in kind of like moving through things that are right and wrong in media at the moment. And honestly, a real heuristic or shortcut can be like, just assume it's wrong. If it comes from any government ever, assume it's wrong to start with. That's where you start rather than right. And that alone will dramatically change your forecasting. But that's just like a throwing it out there tip. It's more about learning how to learn. It's sort of like, okay, shit. So I missed, the system picked up something that I didn't. Don't get better at the system. Get better at the inputs to the system so that doesn't happen again.
Sure. So with it, all right. So we got to learn how to learn, and we have to sort of like engage with all of what is going on. So you mentioned the official reality and the difference between official reality and real reality, right? This is the image that you use is Catherine Austin Fitz's front on boob of truth, which where we've got the areola in the middle. That's our official reality. And then everything around that is real reality. So official reality is the story that you hear on, the TV or whatever. And that is embedded in this larger concept of whatever the real reality am. And so there's truth in the official reality, but Absolutely. It's not the only truth that exists. In fact,
and this is a real challenge, because you have to know that the real reality is there, and people are generally scared of it. And this has certainly happened over the last 2.5 years, right? But the Russia-Ukraine thing is a really good example. So official reality is there are Russian troops in Ukraine. Like, that's true, whether you think whatever the next thing, whether you think that this corrupt Nazi government is some sort of plucky war heroes fighting off the big bad Russian bear. So official reality is there are Russians in Ukraine, and how you expand out from the areola into the boob is defined by things like status in media and money and access to information. Like, she carves off the things that make official reality small, but reality is bigger. And out there in the wider reality is all the stuff that we now know, like Ukraine announced that it was 2 weeks before the special operation that it was going to start hosting and building more nuclear weapons again. which is in violation with their treaties, but also an existential threat to Moscow. All this stuff that doesn't make it into the news, which is true. So it's kind of like official reality is there are Russians in Ukraine. Reality is all this other fucking stuff, right? And if you're just forecasting from the areola rather than the full boom, you're going to be wrong, and you won't see that you're wrong because there are Russians in Ukraine. Like, it's true. It's just that's not the whole thing, right?
Right. So this has me kind of thinking then, like, you have to pay attention to all of it, even on the understanding that most of it is going to be untrue. It's still worthwhile to sort of like know what the official story is and this kind of thing. And so this sort of leads me to the question, like, what is the significance of propaganda and garbage media when devising a coherent model of reality?
Right. It's this kind of was also in the presentation, is this idea that you have to get good at discerning, and that takes work. And there's a bunch of people that have been in the kind of like alternative media that are generally pretty good at that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, James Corbett has a whole course on it, you know what I mean? So you can actually learn the history of media and propaganda and so on. And this is, I think, it depends on, let's say you're a jobbing astrologer, and it depends on what your bread and butter is, right? So if you're kind of like an online astrologer, which is to say that you're forecasting the world in the sort of traditional sense, then yeah, you're going to need to know that stuff. If you are a more traditional astrologer in the sense of your clients are like, when am I going to fall pregnant? When's a good time to get, like, electing stuff and predicting beautiful small domestic things, you need to maybe have more of an insight over things like inflation and the kind of like trends in specific countries, rather than kind of like a grand vision of reality, right? So again, but that's sort of working out situationally where you are, and it comes down to, it's a skill that will make you better at astrology. Is like that learning how to learn and navigating the mostly false information that comes from everywhere that's around us. But that was the original skill. Again, this is what kings used it for, right? That to discern what was true from what wasn't. And that's what I mean. Like, you can do another zodiacal releasing webinar, or you can go, okay, but like an astrologer has to know. This is another way of describing like getting the future correct, is like what's true and what isn't. The whole job is navigating truth and untruth. And if you don't know how to do that, or if you're weak on that, get better at it. Get better at it. Put down the webinars and go and do something else. And as in, go and do something else that can improve it, because you'll come back and you'll even be looking back on previous forecasts as that kind of information hits, and you'll be like, shit. Like, it's the same thing with tarot cards, right? Like, it's always right. You're the one that's right. You look back afterwards and go, shit. And I think the way of closing the gap is, certainly at the moment, is improving that. Because we're in what is unprecedented at the moment is we've always had about, I would say, 90% propaganda in terms of official reality. And it's between 90 and 100% now. But the stakes are huge now. And if people, you need to be able to see through the propaganda to realize that, broadly speaking, and it's a triplicity thing, obviously, the West is collapsing. You have to see that to be good at your job one way or the other. And you see that not necessarily, because we all look at the same sky, and some of us see that and some of us don't, which means it's not the model, it's the stuff that we're putting into it. So that's kind of like one of the big examples. It's like the West is collapsed. There are things that you need to kind of put into the model to make it work better, that won't happen inside the model, right? And that's an intellectual bravery thing, but it's also a differentiator. It's as simple as that. Just like there are some forecasters who are better than others in tarot, in wherever you want, some astrologers are better than others. And in these conditions, the ones who are the best are the ones who have the intellectual bravery and emotional fortitude to travel those dangerous roads, to actually look. And so you end up looking at, so let's take the Russia example again. You see something in the news, then go and read Russia Today. And if people say, but Russia Today is propaganda, yes, it is. What the hell is wrong with you? Of course it is. but so's the shit you're reading. Right? So there's a way of navigating it going like, well, we're saying this and that's wrong, and they're saying that and that's wrong or slanted or whatever you want. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see more people doing, which is like, okay, what does China think of Pelosi's recent visit to Taiwan or what have you? And it's just kind of learning, just knowing in your bones that everyone is lying to you. And so it's like, okay, well, they're lying to me. I'm going to go and see what the other liars are doing. And that's actually good intel to put into a system, because then you can look at the charts and go, well, this is probably going to go this way. But if you just take the official reality, you're just going to be wrong every time, because you're picking one set of lies rather than both. Again, Scorpio exists. What do you want me to say?
Right. Well, so this is actually one of the things that I love the most about Rune Soup in general, is that and your work is that you have been openly willing to engage with thinkers with whom you disagree. So
Sure.
there's been a strong current throughout your work of like looking at people. I've seen you quote some economists saying some wild shit, but like there's probably a nugget of something that is useful for the predictive model, useful for the reality model, useful for figuring out how to think with what am the world. And so so you call that process jailbreaking a lot of times. And this is like going in and finding that little nugget of truth or whatever is going on there. Will you talk about jailbreaking a little bit, like how you came to start doing that and what that concept is?
Yeah, I guess that's probably like a chaos magic thing, right? Like I'm greedy for an edge and there's and value, right? And so a weird example who's kind of in the news, I guess, at the moment would be Alex Jones. So if you haven't seen his Bilderberg documentary when he snuck in, whatever that was, like 1998, right? Like what his career began with. That's actually really good. The sort of coke addicted supplement selling Sandy Hook denying stuff, not so good, right? But I wouldn't not watch. I mean, it's not like I've got it on repeat. I haven't seen it in 15 years, but I remember it being good. I wouldn't not allow myself to be informed by the information from his classic, wasn't Bilderberg. Which one was it? The one where they worship the owl. Bohemian Grove. Anyway, I wouldn't not watch that to get information because he got the Sandy Hook thing wrong. Because that only damages me, right? Like, and this is an intellectual, this is a mind virus that is infecting people in the West at the moment who are living in fear. And one of the things they're particularly afraid of is things like ostracism or social isolation or what other people will say. So that we're stuck in this world where not only, I think most of the people that are supporting and sporting the official reality line don't actually believe it. We're at that Pravda moment where everyone is saying the official reality thing, because if you actually go, I don't think this is either correct or the full story, people pounce on you. And I don't care about that. I've never cared about that. I like the edge and I like winning. And so but Alex Jones, thinking about it, is a good example, which is you please don't uncritically consume everything that he puts out as some kind of gospel, but don't do that for anything, right? There's some real value in there, and it comes from dangerous. I hate using that word. It comes from a mercurial, unreliable source, and everything is that, right? So you just kind of need a sort of, like I said, like an extractive interest in having an edge. And funnily enough, it can allow you to become excited about something like astrology again, when you suddenly realize that there is nothing you will learn that won't make you a better astrologer if you learn how to learn. So you can actually, like, it sounds boring to say, like, oh, I don't know anything about the commodities market and it would be a boring thing to learn about. So, yeah, if it's like school and it's a standalone thing and you're in algebra going, what's the fucking point of algebra? But it's not. There isn't anything that you don't encounter and kind of like pass that shouldn't be making you a better fortune teller. And that's why I leave nothing off the table. It doesn't say, yeah, so I just said the Bohemian Grove documentary, whatever it's called, is actually good. It is. He snuck in and saw them doing their weird naked Moloch crap, right? The Sandy Hook stuff, no, it's not. That's not good. And cool, that's it. And you just need to have that kind of almost like a darkness, but it's an edge. It's wanting to look for that kind of stuff. And again, astrologers, this used to be a dangerous job when they all, I mean, more and more of them are understanding the reality of magic, and that it's a little bit chicken and the egg, but how I experience it is astrology is downstream from magic. You can certainly make the case in the opposite direction, but it is a magical discipline, and that's dangerous. And so you should be. Magicians have always, we used to do things like pacts with the devil, right? We used to take, grimoires would, and this is not a recommendation, grimoires would take like little kids out into the woods to scry demons to get a better trade deal. We used to do dangerous things that I wouldn't do. Obviously, it's not necessarily a recommendation, but this is the product of thought way of thinking again. It's like, we used to be dangerous. Why does official reality need our support? It doesn't. It doesn't think we're real. It thinks we're a joke. Everyone's kind of picked the wrong side on this. Anyway.
Yeah, this makes me think a lot about your timeless post, Why Aren't You Fighting Dirty?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Hang on. It's my camera. Oh, yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if it was focusing on my microphone. But yeah, I'm back.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, so, so you have spoken a lot about like having an edge and getting an edge in some kind of way, and getting an informational or a mind edge, right? An edge in your mind because you know better than, or you know more things, or you have a more coherent model of reality than your competitors do. And so you can have a better predictive rate or something like this, right? You can, or even not like thinking away from just like I got the prediction right. More importantly, what did you do with that prediction, right? You had an idea of what this time was going to look like, what this, you've contextualized your moment. And so then great, in that context, what's the best way to go about living with that? And so there's something here that's really, really important about like getting that edge. And what was the Sun Tzu quote that you put in there? Something about being extraordinary.
Something I can't remember. It's the classic opportunities multiply as they are seized, but I can't remember the other one. That was a long time ago. So this is desire work. You're right, and this kind of comes back to like why are you interested in this sort of stuff? I think a lot of people, and this is actually true in conspiracy land too, right? Which is its own form of not as good forecasting, right? Because you're essentially gathering up information and speculating as to what's kind of like really going on. And because I've been conspiracy world adjacent for so long, it's like, why are you doing this? I know I am doing, and this is coming back to the edge thing. I'm actually looking for information that feeds into what it is I want to do with my life. But I think in astrology and conspiracy land, people just kind of go, well, I got that right. It's like, well, I feel like you could have a better hobby at that point. And people like the edge comes from like, what do you want to get out of life? Because especially when you're like, that all came out of me realizing that no one in the corporate world is playing fair. This is how you kind of end up being, people have no idea how much of that like actual conspiracy stuff like Bohemian Grove and shit is true until you get fairly high up in somewhere like London, in something like media, and your clients and the people you work for and so on. And like, this is all, when I say all true, I mean, way more than you want to be true is true when it comes to that sort of stuff. And I'm like, these fuckers are all fighting dirty. Why aren't I? And this is a desire question. It's because I want something. It turns out, wanted this little permaculture farm at the edge of the world. And my way to it was through that kind of like, that corporate world in London. So for a traditional astrologer, or like a jobbing astrologer, it's not only having an edge in your predictions, but having an edge in your predictions gives you an edge in your business. Like you are a better astrologer, and thus you will get more money or more whatever, right? And so this is the other part of it. I don't know if it's not astrology specific, but people don't do enough desire work. They don't actually have that kind of coherent idea of what it is they want to pull through. And it's especially speaking of like front-on boob models. How I understand the astrology world is that there is, in fact, a core of jobbing astrologers, and like this enormous yammering, shrieking horde of, let's call them astrologists, just to be annoying, of people who are literally trying to like learn it for free, just like picking up tips from podcasts and having takes. But in the overlap between the jobbing astrologers and the horde, there is people who just seem to, it's a bit pick me. It's like, I might have done Chris's course, and I'm like, hey, I'm giving astrology readings now. It's like, who are you? What's what's happening here, right? And you can have an edge by this is the desire work. It's like, well, how much do you want this? And then get good and differentiate and all the rest of it. And that requires like work with a bit of darkness. That's just what it is.
I love that. That's so true. And so then I ask this question of myself all the time: what do I fucking want? And I mostly don't know. And so one of my methods for figuring that out is ask the cards what I want. I ask tarot cards what I want, and then get a picture of it back. And damn it, if it's not right every time, and I'm like, oh, that is what I wanted all along. Shit, I didn't realize that. And so say again.
I think coming back to why do people do why fortune telling is we're a sucker for that. We're a sucker for like, oh shit, I'm an idiot. How did I know? Like, we're a sucker for being told like, in fact, you are an idiot. Like the cards will just like smash you in the face with it. And I think we're a sucker for that. I don't know. Anyway, carry on.
No, that's right. Yeah. And that's, I was actually listening to Ivy Bromius on Joanna Farrar's podcast, talking about how tarot is so great for just like reading you to filth. Like if you want to ask tarot, like, when is everything going to be sunshine and joy? Like, it doesn't know how to deal with that question. But if you ask it to be like, what am I doing wrong? Then it'll tell you what the fuck you're doing wrong. And so, so this gets into, I've heard you speak eloquently and at length about the metaphysics of the question. I've heard you say that the question is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question is the means by which one comes into relation with meaning or the universe or whatever. Would you speak on that a little bit?
Absolutely. My favorite thing. Jung, towards the end of his life, did some research on an exploration of different forecasting systems. He didn't do much tarot. It was more I Ching and astrology, but mostly I Ching. And what he did get to in tarot was, and in any of these things, that his exact words were like, the unconscious constellates around a question. And it does, right? Now, why that is so is a metaphysical question, and one that I have been very interested in from an animist perspective. So you have two options, I think, of living in a magical universe. I think you live in an animist universe, or you live in a, broadly speaking, idealist universe, where the whole thing is essentially the one consciousness. So it's kind of like, do you have one being, or do you have one rainforest as your model? And they're both fine, like as your model for how reality is, right? Now, I think the fact that the unconscious constellates around the question fits better into a one rainforest rather than one being model, because a rainforest is relational and it runs on relationality, and that is the animist model. There are kind of like no things, there are just connections. And so the act of asking a question is an act of connecting. It is connecting to a thought or an idea, or in astrology, like you're fucking connecting to planetary beings, right? And I think that's why the unconscious, like what Jung is describing using his own model, is an animist, is the thing that the universe does, because what you turn your attention to or come into relation to creates a new thing or creates a new energy. So to ask, and this is how I think they landed on horror. We've got these like dumb, and it's not wrong. Again, it's kind of like the boob, right? It's not wrong. It's just not the full thing that's going on. We think horror works, quote unquote, because the event, which is to ask an astrologer, because astrologers were all highfalutin and fancy, to ask an astrologer a question like, should my son, or when is my son getting married, or whatever. Because that event was so significant, it's like an event that can create its own future. Like it's a significant event, so it kind of has a natal chart, right? True, but that's the official reality part of it. That actually works because you and the astrologer come into relation with the cosmos. That's literally, so that's the actual, it's not the prestige of the astrologer and the event of you going to it being a significant event in your life, like going to a wedding or something. It's a powerful event, but it's a powerful event in community in a cosmic sense, right? And so that's, I think, the potency of the question. And people, and I'm big on it, and I got this from Camellia Elias, but like people are, when you get your tarot cards and things that I just want to see, I feel like you should go to jail if you're doing like a 1-card daily read, because it's not like, it's nothing. It drives me nuts. Straight to jail, right? But
do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Yeah. Because there's no question in that. And observe actually what you want to do is find some,
All right, hold up. Because I was taking your tarot course and I heard you say that. And it was before I had a Marseille deck or any of that. Before I started, like that's actually my preference now. And ever since you took the trumps away from me, then I never put them back. I just use the pips now, the pips in the courts. But it was before all that happened. And so I was just reading Rider-Waite-Smith at that time. And I was pulling 1 card a day just to like sort of get some pulls in, you know what I mean? And one time I got the Wheel of Fortune. And so that was my like card of the day. Okay, sure. Wheel of Fortune. Maybe we'll talk about Jupiter, or maybe we'll I don't know what's going to happen. And then later that day, I was working in an herb shop and somebody came in and they had a t-shirt with the Wheel of Fortune on it. And I was like, oh shit, look at this Wheel of Fortune. This was this was the card of the day. And then we like had this moment. That person gave me a huge tip. And then somebody I was not talking to came up and then wanted to get a reading from me. So I didn't have a question around that event, but it was a meaningful event to me that I now remember 4 years later or whatever.
Totally. What card did you get the next day and what happened?
Who knows?
Yeah. That is one of the things that makes the job exciting, where we don't know what's going on, right? We don't fucking know what's going on here. And again, an animist framework has the humility of understanding that, and the fact that the universe is nothing in the universe knows what's going on in a complete sense. It's sort of like intellectually open-ended. But you'll get hits like that. That's some sort of archetypal Wheel of Fortune thing. But if you got like the 3 of Wands the next day and nothing happened, that's kind of what I meant. Like the universe isn't constellating around that. So that could have quite literally been a coincidence in the sense that a broken clock is right twice a day. Or it might be just one of those weird things that happens in a magical living universe, right? Because without a question, you're just kind of stuck on these specific inherited meanings when it comes to tarot cards, right? Whereas if you were, I think you should, especially if you want to get good at it, you should throw the cards every day, but have a question for it, right? And the one that Camellia teaches in her class, it doesn't work for me because my male woman shows up at the same time every time, but like she'll do like, what time was the male going to show up today, or what have you, and things kind of like going to a gym, right? That you can, if you're at 40%, if you're getting that wrong, again, this would be an example of trying to like fix the model. It's like, why I should be getting above chance on things like that, and so daily card spreads are good, but like 1 card saying like this is a 7 of Cups day is not how I do fortune. I mean, people can do what they like, but it's not how I do fortune telling, because the universe constellates around a question. And I think you literally get better at it because the question shapes the universe. Like a question is an act of relating. And in astrology, like it can be really powerful and powerful. I love this stuff. This happens with oracle decks too. Powerful beyond mere accuracy, because you are coming into some kind of relation with these luminous higher order beings of time, right? And so big stuff can happen in your life by doing that. But again, you've got to do, the question works. The universe runs on it. So let's look at what would be another version of a question, because we're doing the energy healing course at the moment. But in any kind of energy healing modality, you ask, you call the energy in. and you let it come through. When you need help from your spirit team, when you need help from saints or angels or whatever, they're around you. The act of asking is what brings their power in. And to ask is a question, right? So literally, I think the universe is built on it, like, because it is proof that the universe relates, you know? And so the question is all for fortune telling for me.
Right. Okay, cool. So you have jumped ahead. This is like 3 questions ahead here, but
We can ask other questions.
You're hitting all the stuff here. What's up, fam? Do you like listening to this podcast for free? Or also dailies are free, or weeklies are free, or the music that is on Spotify or YouTube is free? Do you like enjoying this content for free? Then so do all the other people. A great way for you to support and make sure that everybody has access is to send me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. It's super, super helpful to me when you do that. Make sure to use only this address. Don't use the one that someone DM'd you with my pictures saying that they were me. They were not. I didn't DM you. I promise I did not DM you first asking for money. I only accept donations at this address. But if you wanted to send me something at that address, it would be super, super helpful. You could go to Spotify and listen to Can't Help Myself. Do it like 3 times in a row. That would be super helpful to me. You could join the Patreon, patreon.com/ZamboniFunk, where you will find timing guides and you will find an Astro Basics course if this is all a little outside of your scope of what you think is intelligible and you need to get some ideas about what Saturn means and shit like that. Then you can find a whole Astro Basics course. You'll find a Desire and Metaphysics course there, as well as timing guides to help you launch your project on time and not and do, you know, just like get fewer obstacles and more benefit from that. You can do all of these things. You can find all of it at ZamboniFunk.com. You can send a donation via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. That's super, super helpful. Super helpful. Did I mention that it's super helpful to send a tip? It really, really is. Thank you so much for being here and recognizing that this free content that I put a lot of energy and effort into is in fact valuable. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's get back to it and see what Gordon has to say about this shit. Shout out to Cadno, our mutual friend, who one time wrote about asking for help from spirits, for just the way that you were talking about. And one of the things that she said during that time was that it's the same thing that you mentioned before, which is that like I'm aware that magic works, and I knew that this was going to work all along. But then I asked, and it happened, and it was amazing. Oh my God! Like this happened. But then not only that, but it took until asking. These were things that I had wanted for 2-3 years prior to this, and then after I asked was when I got them. And so there's there's something here about like the asking for help. Is it true that spirit guides or spirit team or whatever you want to call them, or angels or whatever, are they just sitting on the sidelines waiting for us to ask?
No, I think it's literally, how to say this right? So if you look at a kind of animist cosmology that you might find, this is, what's it called? Spell of the Sensuous, right? Classic from 25 years ago, sort of beginning of a phenomenological, like animist sort of text. It's like the beings only exist as spirit guides when you ask them to guide you from spirit. When you don't do that, it's not that they're not there, but in the same way, that act turns you in that moment into a human being on earth relating to spirits. It turns that spirit into a spirit helping a human. So this is what I mean by like the question is all. So it's not necessarily that they sit there like it's the labyrinth waiting for Jennifer to say the name, say the words, right? It's not that so much. And this is why you have to ask, because from an animist perspective, the asking turns a part of the universe into your spirit guides, right? So they don't just, it's not like that they're just sitting there. Some of them are, like some of your dead actually are. But that's because they're in a kind of like permanent relating situation. But generally speaking, especially when you're dealing with stuff like angels or planets or whatever, that are separate beings and also like kind of like harmonic functions of the universe, to get it to be that angel for you at that time, the question turns it into that. and it turns you into the person in relation to it. That's sort of why, that's what happens. That's what Jung was kind of saying, right? Like the collective unconscious constellates around a question. So you'll have this, it's almost like particle and wave, right? So it's wave, and you ask the question and you get the particles. And that's the thing that does it. It's that use of awareness to create something out of the universe. So it's sort of more fundamental than them sitting there. We can experience it as that. And again, it's even easier to tell, say, clients that it's sort of a law of the universe that we come to Earth with all the help we need, but we have to ask for it, or otherwise we don't get it. We can say that to people and sort of know in our heads or hearts or whatever that there is like a higher order metaphysics to it. But that's kind of more where it's at, that it's literally a question shapes the universe, right? It's not like a legal rule, like, oh, they said the words, we can come in and help now. It's fucking weirder than that, right? And it's how things like horror work, I guess. Yeah.
It's always weirder than I thought it was.
Always. But generally more fun as well. And hopefully that'll make people go, like, ask more. And if you look at systems that are better at this around the world, gratitude, blessing your food. So again, Alberto, one of my teachers, is like, because he does all this health stuff with like Dr. Mark Hyman as well. So, different telomere things and whatever. And when people ask him, like, what's the single best dietary intervention you can make to live longer, he says, bless your food, right? And that's a kind of version of, well, it is a question, because you are asking whatever beings that are in how you experience are involved in the generation of life and food to bring that awareness to it. So that's horary. That's tarot carding. That's asking a question of the cards. It's that same process of coming into relation and doing that by attention, right?
And so then obviously it seems like our obvious follow-on here is that we need to ask a better question, you know? And so we need to spend time with this practice of thinking with questions. And in fact, the question itself, just the question, can become a doorway for us to work with things. We both took this class, We Will Dance with Mountains, with Bayo Akomolafe. We Will Dance with Mountains into the Cracks. And in fact, this podcast came out of that. I wanted to have a place where we could have conversations in the cracks. You know what I mean? We could talk about the things that you're not supposed to talk about, and all that sort of stuff. We could talk about propaganda and garbage media and the official reality versus, all this kind of stuff. This is what I wanted to do. And so Bayo Akomolafe, he's one of my favorite thinkers, and he asked this brilliant question: what if our response to the crisis is part of the crisis? Right. Yeah. And part of the brilliance of that question is not the way that it flips things on its head and can turn sort of like I was really dealing with that a lot when I was in the jungle and looking at the mess of the jungle and the relationality of all of that. And also I was drinking a lot of ayahuasca at that time, which is very much a trickster spirit, very much about sort of flipping things and going in a direction that you hadn't thought of and this kind of thing. So this idea of our response to the crisis as being part of the crisis, it does have that sort of trickstery component to it. And Bayo Akomolafe loves that sort of thing. But more important than that, I think, is the fact that this is not a declarative statement, a statement of fact that we are, in fact, responding poorly. But our response to the crisis is part of the crisis, period, point blank. If you say it like that, then there's kind of a wall that comes up. If we can think about Charles Eisenstein's story of separation, like to make the declarative statement is to engage the story of separation, whereas to engage the interrogative, to say it as a question, what if our response to the crisis is part of the crisis, then gives us a way in. It gives us a way of getting in there and being like, well, if that's true, then we can sort of scenario plan around it, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
So
well, like a really good example of that would be, are the Democrats right or are the Republicans right? You go, So what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? It's like, oh, well, I voted for Biden and it's turned out to be probably go down in history as the worst president ever, runaway inflation, blah, blah, blah. It's like, does that mean I vote? Well, he'll be in prison, but like, does that mean I vote for Trump next? It's like, shit. Like, what if the like responding to a crisis by jumping team is part of the crisis, right? So it's like, well, hang on, they're both horrible. So
right, but it took the question to realize that, because if you just have somebody yelling in your face and finger wagging and all this, like, you can't do that. You can't jump ship or that, whatever it is. You know what I mean?
And like, that's the trouble with it. Like, because so we respond to the crisis by flipping teams and also building teams around us where we're right and the other team's wrong, and like responding to a crisis by wronging a bunch of other people this literally will make more crisis. Like, that's his point. It's like, maybe there's a thing we could do that isn't playing right wrong, and posing that as the question is the
what if there was something we could do that wasn't in this binary, right?
And if he gave you the answer, that falls into the binary, because he's like, this is the correct thing to do, and the things you're doing are wrong, which is the thing which is responding to the crisis in that way. So the metaphysics,
it's that intellectual open-endedness of the universe that you were mentioning before, right?
So the metaphysics,
no one in the universe knows the one thing, right?
If you can do one thing, it's like, get good at, as a professional astrologer, you should know the power of questions. And one of the things Bio said early in the course, is that he's that kind of statement, what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis, or retreating or moving into the cracks. He says this isn't making a choice between the outside world and the cracks. He says this is a queering of the idea of choice, right? Which is a kind of more academic, wordy way of saying, what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? So his response isn't like, everything's shit out here and we're all damaged, we should be in this sanctuary mode, hiding away from everything. It's not that. It's the queering of choice. It's the power and metaphysics in the question, right? And this is because, like, again, the word we have, question, is relational. And I think the universe is relational. So to understand, it sounds kind of boring to say you got to get good at asking questions. Like, this is an immense power. I just said it creates spirits, right? Like, this is an immense power to get questions, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and we've been talking about questions on this very sort of metaphysical and intellectual level. We've been talking about questions of divination. And before we move on from questions about divination, we should talk a little bit about asking the right question to the right system, right?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned asking the tarot cards when the mailman was going to arrive, but the mail carriers arrive, at no point is are the cards going to be like at 4 p.m., right? It's going to show you a picture of the thing. And so would you talk a little bit about like omen logic and the way of sort of getting intelligible information by formulating the right question?
Yeah. So a living universe is magical. It's not, and it's magical in the sense that a psychedelic machine elf carnival is magical. And so you have to know that and understand its language and understand that the things that we put, and astrology does this too, it's sort of unavoidable, but you have to kind of learn beyond it. One of the things we've done over the last, say, 200 years when it comes to cartomancy and tarot in particular, is that we've just literally made up and applied to these living symbols stuff like, this suit means spring, this suit means summer, this suit means autumn, and like the word 7 means before 7 p.m. Like, these aren't real, and they're not real because that is not how the universe works. That's a thing humans do as a spell, but it's not in the universe, right? So when you ask the cards, what time will the mail carrier show up? And then you get a couple of cards, and then you go into the book and say the traditional meaning. This one says 11 a.m. or whatever. Or like, it'll say 2 a.m. because it's not real. It won't fucking happen, right? But one of the things you can do is look at the colors or the relationality between the cards. And if you know your system, like it's easy for me, I live on a farm, right? But if you know that there's, like, my geese have a certain circuit. And so at this time of year, they're kind of like down in this front field at about 3 p.m. So there are things that the universe does that times that you need to know. So when I was teaching tarot, it would be like, when is my son coming back from college or whatever? And it would be, although, when is my sister going to call my estranged sister, and so on. And you'll get seasonal stuff, or you'll get events, like it'll be, when someone comes home with a red dog, your sister's going to call. And that's how a living universe times things, right? We invent numbers. Like it's not a real thing. And you just,
well, that's a relationship, right? At the same time as the red dog.
Yes. And that's because it doesn't, and I kind of know this stuff, again, coming back to remote viewing. Remote viewing is 75% accurate, if coming back to the questions, if you know what to look for. It's like, where is the Soviet jet, the downed Soviet jet? But if you try to, there was only like, Pat Price could do this, but none of the others could, was like reading documents in a top secret area. It can't do numbers. It can't do numbers and words. Now that tells, numbers and letters. That tells us something very important about how reality works, which is we invent these things. They're not, and so they have that level of reality. So numbers and words are second order real because they are something that humans create the way a snail creates a shell, right? But if you know that, then you won't be like looking for 11 a.m. or whatever, and your accuracy will improve, right? So you can ask a yes/no question using colors. Say, will the mail arrive before 11 a.m.? Well, you might get that right. But the way the universe understands that is like, will the mail arrive before the geese are in front field? And that, I guarantee you will be more accurate on than 11 a.m. or whatever. And it's because it's that second order stuff. Like you have to work with the fact that the universe is this living psychedelic carnival, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. So then we have been, to my mind, all of these ideas around the metaphysics of the question and all of this stuff is not only limited to the psychedelic divination stuff, but is also embedded in the everyday, the real sort of stuff. Now, so you are a pro podcaster, you do interviews and all this kind of stuff. And so whenever you have somebody on your hands who you know is brilliant, who you know just has the best things to say, and you may even have an idea of what they're gonna say, and you want to bring it out of them, then how do you go about developing a line of inquiry?
There's not a... The approach to that is there's not too many universals. The first one, and this is kind of why I have the "Were you a weird kid?" question, because I started podcasting when it was still a lot of my early guests, it was the first time they'd ever been on a podcast. They're like, oh yeah, podcast. Some of them had to download Skype because I'm ancient. That's sort of, how it is, right? And one of the things I did with the "Were you a weird kid?" question was it allowed people, because they're generally nervous, they were to begin with, it allowed people to be comfortable because they know their childhood, and the question's kind of like silly, right? You get a lot of really good answers out of it, but the question itself is silly. But that's metaphysics of the question, teaching the power, right? So what you do is make it easy to start with, and you can tell with like beginning podcasters, they'll say things like, "Oh, welcome, Gordon White. So tell me what your latest book is about." And I'm like, fucking lube it up first. And that's dumb, because it's like, oh shit, we're like going from 0 to 100, and it annoys me, which means I'm going to be shorter with my questions otherwise. And it sounds right, because it's like, I don't want to take up much of this person's time, so let's try and be serious about it. It's like, no, ask me, how many chickens died this week or whatever. If you're, not enough, whatever. Right? Open it up, and that's the first step. And then the other one is, the other universal, and it's literally what we're talking about here, is to take seriously the metaphysics of the question, and that being in that didactic mode of question and answers is sacred. It is a form, it is a ceremony in and of itself. And so you attend and you follow those, you follow along with it, right? Like when I get my stuff, if I'm interviewing someone for a book, like I'll have a few quotes of things that I like, but then otherwise you just got to attend and flow with the energy of it, which you can be good at by understanding how powerful questions are, by understanding that it is a ceremonial function to be in this kind of like didactic question thing. So let what comes up comes up. And by the end of it, when you hit stop and whatever, I get this a bit. It's like, wow, that went really quick. And it was, I think that was the best one I've done. Right. And it's not anything really to do with me beyond knowing how to get, how more of their unconscious can be expressed. Right. So it's that open sacred space and get out of the way thing. Like a good question is one that delivers more than the answer, and that will always bring you the next thing. But again, it's sacred, and if you do it that way, yeah, that's I think how it works. That's my guess.
All right, that's really interesting, because that really it reminds me of I was professionally trained as an herbalist in New York City, and so one of the things that we spent a little bit of time on was the intake. Right. So you get somebody in and you want to know what's going on with them. And like maybe they've like written some stuff down on an intake form or something like that, but you want to be in a room with them ideally, or even a Zoom meeting or something like that will do the job. But you want to have some time with them and you want to give them some space to open up and to say their piece and to be like, okay, well, this is really what's going on with me and this kind of stuff. And a lot of times this is going to be, you have to lube it up first, right? You have to like spend some time. You got to let this person get comfortable. You got to sort of like be oblique around the edges for a little while. And like,
when it's health stuff, especially, and I mean, this is sexist, but when the clients are men, understand completely. Like the first 20 minutes of a shamanic session, we will often get, how can I help you, blah, 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 and opening it up. And we'll often land on like, okay, cool, let's do that. And then before we go into the ceremony, I'll ask, like, is there anything else that you think is germane to bring up at this time? And it'll be, as a matter of fact, I'm like recovering from cancer or whatever, or like, and that was the thing they wanted to ask in the first place. And you just have to get them in a place that allows. That's the power of the questions, right? It's that same thing, particularly when it's health stuff. Like I'm sure it's very similar in herbalism. If people come in because they want their dingle to have less tingle, they're probably not going to open with that. And then I love it. It's such a privilege to be able to be in that kind of service to someone's healing, right? And so it doesn't bother me if it takes people. That's part of it.
It's honestly a big part of the healing, right?
Exactly. To be heard and to have shared the thing that they're currently going through, and the universe doesn't end, because sometimes it can be very intimate. And they're like, so you get them there and they'll share it and they're heard by someone who's like non-judgmental and here to help them. And the universe didn't end. No one laughed, whatever. And it's really, very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It really, really is. And it, honestly, like that's half my job as an astrologer as well. Just like I'm here for you to say your thing. You know what I mean? And so, but that's kind of what we do as professionals, right? We spend a lot of time in the healing space and sort of like trying to help people to feel better and be better and help to generate the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible and all this sort of thing. So you are currently in the middle of an energy healing course right now. Mm-hmm. And so we will get to that, but you've spent the first half of the year helping us to understand that diagnosis is a curse, right?
Yeah.
And so will you talk about that real quick?
So I got that from Lynn McTaggart, who I love, and I've loved her work for a very long time. And she wrote a book, I think it's called What Doctors Don't Tell You, I can't remember. There's a Ken Berry book Ken Berry's book is Lies My Doctors Told Me. Lynn's book is What Doctors Don't Tell You. So she's been in the kind of, as a journalist, she's been in this world of looking at the shortcomings of the allopathic model, which is basically mostly wrong because the metaphysics are wrong. Like it emerges out of materialism. When people freak out about that, like it means I'm going to take their antidepressants off them or something. I'm hunting bigger game, right? Like I'm literally coming after the metaphysics, and that they're saying, like, because then people will say, oh, but I had back surgery. And I'm like, anyway. What Lynn has found from decades of research into healing and all the rest of it is that if you tell someone, and I learned this from Sylvia Browne in the 90s, if you tell someone you have 3 months to live, very often they will die 3 months to the day afterwards. So this is kind of like, it's anti-question magic, because you're giving someone the answer. And that's why she says diagnoses are curses. And we sort of, the last fucking health fast we've been through the last 2.5 years, there are things we used to know before March of 2020, like fear reduces your immune response by about 50%, right? So we actually did do studies on the fact that loneliness kills more people than cigarettes. And this is probably more true now than it was then, right? And we knew all these things. So what that means is that your head and your heart are profoundly, maybe even almost entirely implicated in how fast and how well you heal. And so diagnosis of curses is, I used to say, I still do say, optimism is a spell. It's like the other side of that, right? And it doesn't mean hide from the fact it's like you're going through but I won't even say health crisis. I will say health journey for the same thing. Like, I hate cancer survivor. I don't hate cancer survivors, but the word is weak. Survivor is not a happy word. And like, I'm going through a health crisis, so I've been sick for 2 years. It's like, you are on a health journey, right? This is part of that. And it's not Pollyanna. It's not pretending someone isn't going through a health journey. It is giving them the powers, the magical powers that we literally scientifically know are there to improve the outcome. There's this weird situation. It's like where you have according to these models, and even then, a diagnosis occurs is because the body, this comes back to the metaphysics that you think works. And allopathic medicine is 19th century, and it thinks of the body as like a steam train made of parts gradually running out of steam until you die. And you can like swap parts out if something goes wrong, but they never get better. So a heart never gets better if it's been damaged. And it's like, well, do you think that your body is a 19th century steam train, or do you believe it is a miraculous divine being that heals, in the sense of like, you can be 80 and you cut yourself and your skin will heal? Does that stop at the skin? And like literally in allopathic medicine, it does. It stops at the skin. And this is what things like chronic health conditions and whatever are. And there is so much healing that is available by stepping into a better metaphysics and changing nothing else. I'm not saying throw away your blood pressure medication or any of that stuff. What I'm saying, what Lynn is saying, is that diagnoses are curses because they come out of a dark and empty reality that isn't true, right? You are going through a health journey in a living universe, not a dead universe. You step into that, all kinds of stuff becomes available to you.
There's much truth here. There's much truth in this idea and this way of thinking. But at the same time, it's helpful to have a model of what is going on. You know, like if you twist your left knee, you don't massage the right one, right? You need to have an idea of what's happening out here, and so we spend, you know, I find that there's a lot of good scholarship on figuring out what is the problem, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about what is the problem. Now,
what is the healing
thinking with this?
Not what
Say again.
What is the healing opportunity? Not what is the problem.
Okay. All right. Sure. What is? Yeah. Sure. What's the source of the discomfort? Is another way that I like to talk about it, because I spend a lot of time talking about like the difference between benefics and malefics, for example. Sure. Right. Benefics. That Ben makes it sound good, makes it sound like it's a thumbs up situation, and the mal makes it sound bad, right? But in fact, those are things that, like Jupiter and Venus, which are benefics, they tend to bring us things that we like. They tend to bring us things that we feel comfortable with and that bring us a certain sense of joy or something like this, right? Versus the malefics, which will tend to bring us discomfort or challenge or something like this. Now, we can all, of course, think about times when you should have got up off the couch and did something hard or something like this, right? So I end up spending a lot of time talking about comfort versus discomfort in this kind of space. But with that in mind, we do need to spend some time with what is generating all of this discomfort. And so doing this not only on, on the last show, I had my herbalism teacher, Richard Mandelbaum, on, and he spoke a lot about ecosystemic health and this idea of like being like there is no healthy person in an unhealthy ecosystem. Because of this model of relationality, we are all the one thing. And it even comes down to like the same concept of like as above, so below. It's all the one thing, right? And so you are not a healthy individual in an unhealthy environment. Or another way to think with this might be like generating a healthy environment is how we generate healthy individuals, is how we generate healthy selves.
It is. Now, so Lynn says diagnoses are curses. The follow-on from that is that there are no diagnoses. There are only patients. There are only people, right? And so people don't get that diagnosis literally means that disease exists as a separate thing on a list that like the DSM-5 or whatever, that you go and look at it. The doctor goes and looks at it, and it's got a Latin name for something that was there, and it's been applied to you because you're no different. You're just a machine. It doesn't matter what's going on with you. You have this thing. It's a label that's put on you. That's shit. That's 19th century shit. What Richard's talking about there, and I like the model, an ecosystemic view of health is that is another way of saying that each being is individually constituted by his or her relations. So there is no diagnoses at all in that model of, which is good, of herbalism. It doesn't mean that you go in and go, I don't know what you get. It means it's not an external thing. It's what happened to you. Like, this is what I mean. There's no diagnoses. There's no such thing as disease. This is a weird way of saying it. It's a bit of a flex. You know what I mean? There's no such thing as disease. There's only patients, right? And that doesn't mean that people don't have heart attacks. It means that there's what's going on in the totality of someone's life is what a better, frankly, healing modality, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, herbalism like this, shamanic healing, medical astrology, any of that stuff addresses. And that's what people don't get. They're like, what do you mean there's no such thing as diagnoses? I have high blood pressure. It's like, that you have it, right? And let's look at how that works in how much time are you spending barefoot on the earth? None. It's like, right, okay. So do you have high blood pressure, or do you have a lack of feet on the earth, which, by the way, is literally a profound way of adjusting someone's blood pressure because you get the negative, like the electrons from the earth, right? Like it's literally used as a treatment. So do you have high blood pressure, which is this diagnosis, or do you have not enough time with your feet on the earth? And that's ecosystemic. That's how are you relating? How are you in life? That's what I mean by like diagnoses and curses, because we just think that we are forced to ingest a wrong worldview when we take a diagnosis, which is that 19th century steam-powered human model. And it doesn't mean people don't have high blood pressure, although I would never say it that way. But it doesn't mean people aren't going through stuff. It means how we speak about it is a spell, you know.
Yeah, dealing with world models that are just frankly wrong is a real problem out here. And you have spent a fair bit of time like maybe diagnosing that situation and talking about what's going on here. And so you have one of your things that I think is most eloquent and helpful in thinking with an ecosystemic model of health is the world without sin. So would you speak a little bit about the world without sin and what that is and how what you're describing with that?
Yeah. Funnily enough, this can bridge the gap back into how we improve the inputs into the model, right? Because I got that from it's a line from the Firefly movie. Well, it's from called Serenity. The TV show was called Firefly. And this was a pre-cancelled Joss Whedon thing. And it's a sci-fi, and in the film, the bad guy, if you will, like it's sort of like their version of the Empire. It's this sort of clean, gleaming technocracy where nothing goes wrong. And that's literally a good indictment or a good description of how official reality works now, where censorship and things that you are and aren't allowed to say, like if you are disagreeing with official reality, you are erased from it. And this is the world without sin, so that you can jump on, not that I recommend anyone do this, but you can jump on Facebook or Twitter and just see a gleaming world, right? Because the stuff that violates it isn't there. And changing the definition of recession in the US from like 2 decades of negative growth, 2 quarters of negative growth, so that they can just say the US isn't in recession. That's world without sin, right? Because it's actually just like changing, it's having this fake beaming world that has nothing wrong in it, but there's so much wrong in it, right? And how propaganda works, particularly this technocratic propaganda we have now, is they have to make the world without sin. It has to be without friction. It has to be seamless, and everything has to work, and there's nothing going wrong, and there's no counter opinions to what power is doing. It's not the brutal kind of it's not yet the brutal kind of suppression and eradication of difference that we would find in like Stalinist Russia. It's not there yet. It's because it doesn't need to be. It can actually just like make the world clean by shadow banning or whatever. So you can actually just like operate in this bubble where everything's going fine. And that's secondary to the Alex Jones thing, because I think that's literally what's going on there. I think his head is on a pike as a warning to the rest of like unofficial rather than alternate media. Not that he wasn't wrong to do what he did. So that's the world without sin. That's this idea that it's this beaming, healthy, perfectly understandable world, and it's wrong. It's the sort of CNN official reality, right? And I always think from a health perspective, if you live in that world, you've inherited a cosmology that isn't going to provide health in the long term. And it like, again, Alberto says we don't have healthcare in America, we have disease care. And that's the allopathic model inside this framework. And it comes back to like, if you don't realize that they're building a world without sin around you or have built it, you're essentially forecasting inside it, right? Which is to say, you're going to be wrong. And that's that same journey. That's that same journey out of a beaming technocratic dead universe into this sort of living psychedelic magical one, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that we find on outside the areola, as it were, out here in psychedelic real reality, is that the world without sin just isn't the thing. And trying to go about creating the world without sin ultimately is a story of separation. Shout out to Charles Eisenstein.
Absolutely.
And so, on this last show, I was talking to Richard, and he brought up the 18th century eclectic physician John Scudder, and he describes this model of disease wherein disease is not an enemy to be cast out of the body, but rather is some kind of uncomfortable and malfunctioning, already important process. So Richard's example was autoimmunity, right? So you need a certain bit of autoimmunity in order to in order to live your best life. In order to be healthy, you need that function. Our problem is not with autoimmunity. Our problem is with berserker mode, right? It's this idea that like it's going so crazy that you're like harming yourself, or like there's a generation of discomfort there, right? And so with this model of disease in mind, if disease is in fact generally a healthy process that then that is crazy, that gets crazy, then if we were able to reel that back in, what would the world without sin, what would a healthy expression of the world without sin be or look like?
I don't think there would be one. Because let me give you a good example. Because a world without sin is a world where everything is understood, and certain things just aren't allowed to be true. So I had a client who was, again, diagnosed as a curses, had some neurological symptoms, and so was about to be diagnosed with MS and be put on a bunch of drugs. And then she realized she's living in a house with black mold, and she got out of the house with black mold. Does she have any symptoms now? No. God. She didn't have fucking MS, right? What she had was exposure to toxins. And that, the world without the confidence model of going you have these symptoms, let me go over to my list of things that are allowed to exist, down to MS, applied that onto her. And she would have been taking medicines with, quote unquote, medicines with severe side effects for something she didn't have, and would still be experiencing the neurological symptoms from the black mold. So I actually don't think there's anything, and that's an individual person. See how there's no diagnosis. Someone else without black mold comes in with neurological symptoms, might be going through some kind of neurological thing, although I actually think it'll be a different toxin, right? So the body, one of the ways of stepping into a post-disease model is that there are no diseases, there are only healing responses. So if you begin there, you're going to move into the kind of naturopathy that is electrifyingly exciting for me. I think this is what out here in the boob is the real medicine that is returning after centuries and in some cases millennia back to it. And it's that relational model again, right? It's this woman was in a house, and it's relational not just to the black mold, but to how we're living. So it's well, look at the condition of our housing in the richest country in the world. Look at all this, it's all of that. And but instead you get, you have MS, take some drugs. It's drives me nuts. You can, anyone, and I'm not saying, actually, I am kind of saying that there's no such thing as any chronic conditions. I'm mostly as a flex, I'm saying that. A lot of people who are experiencing things that have been given the label of chronic, don't need to be in that label. And in fact, and again, it comes back to the relationality. It's okay, have your feet on the earth, live somewhere, which is unaffordable, have a healthy diet that actually provides the nutrients that the human body needs. Stay away from the EMF, just return to what a human is. And this comes back to the body heals. If you stop putting it in a state of permanent damage, the body heals. And anyone who's going, it's literally easier said than done, which is my fucking point, that I can't think you can get it inside the world without sin, because none of that's true in the world without sin. None of that's true. What's true is ever improving mRNA injections for everything, rather than maybe if we lived like humans, we would have fewer of these conditions. It's fundamentally a powerful metaphysical statement to step into a living world where your body is a divine being that heals, that is always healing, and there are things that are getting in its way: EMF, diet, stress, blue light, whatever it happens to be. And that's not, I hate putting this qualifier on the end, because I think this is sort of the optimism as a spell thing, but that's miraculously true. And I almost want to say, that's it. That's everything. It's probably not it. It's probably 80% of it, right? And people who are experiencing whatever, depression and so on, and treatment-resistant depression, 30 days living like a human, see what happens, And I again, easier said than done, but that's kind of the point. The point is this fucking life we're living in is not conducive to human wellness, right? It suppresses it, and the world without sin does, because it doesn't think that's real. It doesn't think there's anything special about a human, or that the body is this divine healing being. It thinks it's a fucking robot that's run by code that you can kind of learn, attached to a moth virus, and stick into people. So I'm not sure if there's much healing inside the world without sin at all. I think
okay.
Yeah. I think you think you can mask symptoms, and that's its power. And that's real world without thinking stuff, right? The world without sin stuff. So high blood pressure again. I have high blood pressure. I take blood pressure medication. I get a test. My blood pressure is back to normal. I go off the blood pressure medication. It goes back up. So it's like, so have I cured it? My body is moving blood at a higher pressure rate for some reason. And usually it's EMF and the rest of it, right? It's like the body doesn't have, the body needs to, for whatever reason, constrict the cardiovascular system to move oxygen faster. Am I not getting enough oxygen? That's it. Why am I not getting enough oxygen? Because of the EMF environment. Now, we can effectively poison the body to relax the musculature around the cardiovascular system that opens it back up, but that hasn't solved the thing that is causing the trouble. And that's world without sin. Like, all we do is mask symptoms and call that medicine, because it doesn't exist if you can't feel it, but it's still there, right? So that's, again, I'm not telling people to go off blood pressure medication. I'm using it as an example that it's like, it's an indication that it's not a thing. It's an indication that something else is wrong. And so what we do is remove the indication that something's wrong and go, all done. That's world without sin medicine.
So building off of that here, you mentioned that healing or cures are going to be, they reside in this space of like living in the way that a human should live, or being back to what human is or am or whatever, right? And so this sort of makes me think about Robin Wall Kimmerer, my auntie, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She's the bomb. And in that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, she spoke about, in the introduction, she said that she at that time was teaching at SUNY as an environmental like science educator. And so she had a bunch of students, and she gave them a little survey about what they thought that the effect of humans on nature or environment, I forget how it was worded exactly, but like sort of like what the effect of humans in relationship to nature or green spaces would be. And all of the students reported terrible things happening. They were all like, humans should just leave it alone. And Kimmerer's main point here is that this is not the way that we exist in a harmonious relationship with, like, we are part of this system, and we therefore have a job to do, or it sort of makes me think that not only do my feet love the earth, but the earth loves having my feet on it, right? There's a relationship, both of them together. And so this leads me to the question, like, what are humans here to do? What are we supposed to, if we have a role in this relational universe, what is our role?
So the Tutihil Maya would say that humans are the earrings of the cosmos. And generally speaking, a broadly Maya meaning or purpose to life is beauty and like creation of it, which is to say, singing, loving friends, eating the right stuff, keeping ceremony, and all the rest of it. The spirits in this system and in further south in the Andes, because the Andes have a similar idea, but like with more energies, and I'll get to it in a minute. The spirits are pleased and fed by beauty, by us, and it's the appreciation of it, and it's the creation of it. And so this is a function that we have in a higher order system. Now, in the Andes, it's kind of more, there's more energy involved in it, like quite literally. So the way energy cycles, it kind of, our energy will go from the top of the mountain, and energy goes from the top of the mountains down into the center of the earth and back up, and it brings all of that kind of stuff with it. And so the expression of ceremony and gratitude and beauty and so on is the energy that feeds it. And if we don't do that, it will also run on war. So one way or the other, the planet gets fed by our energy. And so that I find has more, like, it's easy to do the Tutihil Maya one because it's the purpose of human life is beauty, because that individualizes down to each person and his or her capacity and where they are in life. And you can be in solitary confinement in like a Chinese cell, and that can still be true, right? That can actually still be true. It's not my first go-to for beauty, but like it's still true there as it is in the fucking rainforest or something, right? And so I think that's the purpose. I think our ecosystemic function is quite elvish. Like we are to celebrate and generate the beauty and joy and ceremony. And it might have, at least according to say the Kero and other like sort of Andean cosmologies, it might literally aid in the functioning of the cosmos. And it feels like that in ceremony when you do it. It feels like this is aiding. And so does the generation of music. If you get that, particularly live music, it's like, I'm somehow fixing the world with this. And like the Kero would say, yeah, you are, right? That's absolutely what's happening. Humans are designed to express and understand beauty. And beauty kind of like, you know how we just massively embiggen the metaphysics of the question. Beauty in an animist context is also an enormous idea. It's not just like, she's hot. Beauty is like scar tissue. Like beauty is like, you know what it is. Like there's like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is basically this whole idea of like, does beauty exist? Classic book. Is beauty something external and in the universe? And it is. Like it's a quality that people can, it's mostly, but not, it's almost like universal in its appreciation and individual in its expression, right? But the beauty way, whatever you want to call it, I think is what we're here for. If we understand beauty in that Andean or Chutahil Maya kind of sense, that's what I think humans are for. And I love that idea. It's just a really powerful way of saying it, that humans are the earrings, like, because the Maya earrings were like, make noise, jingle, like there's no point to them, right? They're beautiful, the owner loves them, they make music, they catch the light, like there's so much in that. And it's really important because it's an essential part of, say, a Maya woman's wardrobe. At the same time, it's not essential, right? It's frivolous, but she loves that the best. There's just in that way that indigenous metaphors work on about 10 different fucking levels, and they'll just keep hitting. The idea that humans are like the earring of the cosmos, that's what I think it is. That's what I think the purpose of life is, to be an earring of the cosmos.
Ooh, that is delicious. I really like that a lot. So then here we are trying to generate the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. We're trying to be in better relationship with our relations and all of this. And it feels wildly overwhelming because we have to unlearn everything that we've known, and we have to learn how to learn, and we have to learn how to engage these different models of reality and construct and understand that everyone is lying and turn it, like, generate a coherent model of reality throughout all that. It turns into a lot of work very quickly, and it can be sort of like difficult to engage with. And so I'd like to have a little something that just can be easy. It's a nice little way in for us to sort of begin to have a better relationship with our relations. And so one of the ways that I like to engage that a lot is with language, because the way that humans spend our time is in thought and with language. We even if we aren't expressing to others, then generally we're thinking in language. And so the way that we use language goes on to shape how we think and whatnot, right? And so I think of a lot of, I know, in fact, that there are a lot of easy word tricks to sort of like make yourself think better. One of my favorites of these is to ask the question who rather than what, right? Mm-hmm. So if you go outside and you see a tree that you don't recognize, you don't know what kind of tree that is, you can be like, oh, who is this? or if you're outside and you should be outside, right? Because that's part of what it is to be a person. But if you're outside and you have a child with you and you see a spectacular bird, you can be like, who is that, right? Rather than asking what. Right. And so here's something that, because there, if we ask the question who, then that's a person up there. Right. And so if we can grant personhood outside of ourselves, then already we can be in better relationship than if we were relating to that tree or bird as thing or as resource. Right. And so this is a nice little easy method for us to just go about, and we can sort of help the next generation to think better using this as well. So do you have any of these easy tricks that you can just sort of like pull out on the fly like that?
It reminds me, speaking of Robin Wall Kimmerer, in indigenous languages, it would be like calling your grandmother it, right? The most complex, easiest thing to do is to learn another language other than English, and in particular, like an indigenous language like Tuvalu or whatever, right? Now, I'm a little bit busy, so probably won't get to that. Barely came back from fucking 3 months in Latin America with Spanish that's only slightly shitter than I went with. So I might focus on that one to start with. But quite literally, so Donna Haraway says, go outside English and the wild multiplies. So one of the things, I also sort of mentioned this in London once, if you go down into English, the wild can also multiply. Like you can follow on words like weird and so on. So the first step is, like the easiest step is to kind of realize that in particular modern English is great for a lot of things. People kind of rag on it, but because it's such a polyglot language, it can absorb stuff and work in a way that something like French isn't as good at from an adaptation perspective.
Yeah, I really love English myself.
Yeah,
I'm a student of hip hop, and there's so much that you can do with English, and you can like generate layers of meaning and stuff like this in a way that is not really possible in a language like Spanish, where it's just a smaller vocabulary. There are fewer words, and so there's much more baked into each word, which can. It's a different way of doing things, but you can really, in English, you can really slice it up and say just this particular thing, and you can occlude other meanings or exclude other meanings by saying that word and not this one. I really love English, and people do rag on it, and I'm not here for that.
Yeah. And if you try to do that in something like Spanish or French, what happens is they import the English word, because that English word is like
totally.
Yeah, right. So I think English does a lot of things really, really well, but one of the things it doesn't do well is to see the reality of personhood outside of the human. And that is as simple as not having, like in French, like le or la. That is as simple as not even gendering the world. Because if you gender something, it's kind of like halfway. Like we'll call ships after like she or whatever. So it's in there. So the first thing is to kind of realize that English is a very powerful, and I like it as a language, but it doesn't do that very well, right? It doesn't actually, you have to, which is one of its powers, and it's what I do. Like I've got idiosyncratic expressions for all kinds of stuff, like think with and what even am, and it's to push at the points where English can be used to highlight the shortcoming in English's own kind of like capacity to see the more than human world. More than human world itself is kind of clunky, but I think one of the things is to kind of like make peace with these clunky but powerful spells. Think with is a really good one. More than human is another, but just find the one that has the most energy for you. If it is that like it or who, find the one that has the most energy for you and use it a lot, right? So it might be your little who trick, or it might be think with, or it might be whatever. But English can do this thing where, and it's staying with the trouble, right? Use one or two idiosyncratic phrases, because think with is a good one, which I got from Tim and Gold. It's a good one because you say the word think a lot. You don't sort of really realize it until you decide one day, I'm going to be using think with, like rather than thinking about, think with. Because for people who aren't familiar with the idea, if I think about my farm, I'm doing the action to something that's passive and inert, or if I think about the Amazon, that's a good example, because as soon as I say it like that way, like it feels like deforestation to think about the Amazon rather than to think with the Amazon. And this is that Kogi idea I said before, like to think is to listen. And to use the word to think with is to acknowledge that the Amazon in the imaginal, in mind, but also the shared imaginal, is part of the Amazon. It's an extension of it. It's probably its origin, right? So to have a thought or to be in relation to a thought, you can step into a world where that's true by switching the word about for with. And then again, English is really powerful in that sense, right? So that's a really good one, because people will use the word think a lot. I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking with my grandmother who might have passed or whatever. That's a really good and powerful way of kind of going, there's something about the act of thinking that is listening, and that the thoughts in the imaginal have some kind of reality. It's not identical to this, but it has some kind of reality. So that's a really powerful one. That's my favorite. I think that's an easy one for people to slip in. And even if you don't do it, because I noticed this, I use think with all the time. That's happened. That switch has happened. But there'll be a few times where I'll be amongst normals, and I won't use some of the kind of like idiosyncratic bridges to animism into English. And so I'll use like the normie phrase. But in my head, I'll be like, I'm using that normie phrase again. And like, I actually know that's wrong, but I'm out at drinks with people I've never met. I'm not going to be like, everyone, put your glasses down. I need to talk for 5.5 minutes about the difference between thinking of and thinking with. And so, but that's enough for it to be in you as you say the normie word to go, actually, that's not even how reality works. But think with is my vote for the first one, to step into that kind of like living cosmos.
Sure, totally. And my listeners will have heard me say that over and over and
Excellent.
over. So that's another favorite of mine. Wonderful. Well, we have made it a long way. It's been about 2 hours here. Is there anything that we have missed that you wanted to tell the people who are interested in the ZamboniFunk enterprise?
No, not at all. We've had a great chat. We've sort of it's an example of that kind of like going all over the map questioning stuff. We did well.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Cool. Well, there is something that I want to say to ZamboniFunk listeners, and it is check out runesoup.com. It is the best $10 a month you'll ever spend. It is the most value, I don't know, on the internet. It's amazing. It's really great. It is way more valuable than my membership is, which is more expensive. So it is. RuneSoup is really, you learn a lot there. It can be a lot because of all of the idiosyncratic ways of thinking with things, and it's so deep at this point that there's a little bit of it can be sort of intimidating to look at all of it. But if you just get your little toesies in there, then I have no doubt that at very least you'll find something that is worth chewing on in that space.
If I charged more, I would have to onboard people more gently. You know what I mean? Like if it was $30 a month, people would say, I'm paying you $30 a month. There's so much here. Where do I begin? It's kind of an interesting situation to be in, because I like, find the thing that has energy for you and follow it in kind of, I might start with tarot, or I might do ancestors or what have you. But I was thinking about this the other day, because it's the same price as it was when it started, when there was one course. Right. And I'm like, if I charged more, I would have to have, and there is onboarding videos so people can help, and the community will point you in the right direction. But it's like it's been going for so long, it's a funny situation to go, oh, yeah, I'll think about that. Because you have to have like a proper onboarding to charge more. And maybe I'll do it anyway. Maybe I'll do a proper onboarding in Q4, but there's so much in there, and just go with your intuition, follow the bits you like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and one of my favorite things about it, about RuneSoup in general, is jailbreaking, and this sort of like engaging with things that you disagree with. And there's so much of that to be had throughout the bonus member material and throughout the coursework and all this sort of stuff. Like if you have your ears open and you're ready to listen, then you'll be ready to learn something, even though you are almost guaranteed to engage with something that is wildly outside of your view of reality, or what you think is a good thing to think, or these kinds of things. Like you'll there's so much there to think with and to learn from that we can that I super recommend it. And if you want to understand what the fuck I've been talking about, then let's go to the source of text here.
Nice one.
So check out runesoup.com. Thank you, Gordon, so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was a super, super fun chat.
Indeed. Well, we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank y'all for being here, and peace and blessings to the family.